On June 11th, 2020, the comic book community lost one of its greatest contributors, Mr. Denny O'Neil. As a lifelong Batman fan, I mean, you can just look behind me and see this entire four-drawer file cabinet behind me is full of Batman comics, and I do mean full. I'm running out of room. Thousands of Batman comics. Uh, I have Denny O'Neil to thank for that. And if you like Batman, so do you. When I was a kid, Batman the Animated Series came out. And I loved that show. I still love that show. It's the greatest comic book cartoon that we'll ever get. Nothing will ever be better than it is. And, you know, I got into comic books and the Batman comics and all that stuff. And, like, you know, I'm not a comic book writer as much as I would love to be, and I'm not an artist. But the comic book artists and writers that are alive today, a lot of them have been influenced by that show. And that show was influenced by the comics that Denny O'Neil wrote in the 70s with Neil Adams. Batman the TV show with Adam West and Burt Ward, super popular in the 60s. The first season it came out, it was insanely popular. I don't think people understood that it was why it was so popular, but it was. And I think it surprised them, and so they just, they went with it. And DC Comics modeled the Batman comics after the TV show, and they became very campy. And after the show petered out in the 70s, they asked Denny O'Neil, who was working for DC Comics at the time, if he would write Batman. And he was like, I don't do camp, man. I don't understand camp comedy. I'm not about that. And they said, no, we don't want to do that. We think that's over. We want you to do your own thing. And so Denny O'Neil claims that he and Neil Adams just went back to the early comics that Bob Kane and Bill Finger wrote, and just took Batman back to his roots. But they did so much more than that. Like, they took what Batman was created to be, and they modernized him, and they gave him so much more depth than he had ever had before. I mean, Batman was already an established character in the world, and people loved Batman mostly because of the TV show. But Denny O'Neil helped shape Batman into what we have today. If it wasn't for Denny O'Neil, we wouldn't have stuff like the Michael Keaton Batman movies, the Christian Bale Batman movies. We wouldn't have all these awesome animated movies we have. We wouldn't have anything if it wasn't for Denny O'Neil, because Batman probably would have phased out of existence a long time ago. So, me being a huge Batman fan, I owe that fanhood, that fandom to Denny O'Neil. Without him, Batman wouldn't be what Batman is today. He wouldn't be anywhere near as cool if he still existed. And, Denny O'Neil is just a legend. And so, like, I don't know the guy personally. I never met the guy. I'm not one to, like, fawn over famous people and celebrities. Like, I don't give a crap about signed books or autographs or any of that stuff. Like, I just don't care about that crap. Like, I'll meet somebody, sure, but I want to, like, just shake their hand and talk to them and stuff, But I don't care if they sign something. But most people, you know, it's like, I mean, if I meet them, cool. If I don't, But like, Denny O'Neil is one of the few comic book creators that I would have wanted to meet. Him and Stan Lee. Uh, and, you know, Stan Lee was awesome. Stan Lee took a lot of credit for things that he didn't do. And, you know, a lot of people don't like that about Stan Lee, but Stan Lee was the face. You know, he was the PR person, and he had to represent the company and everything like that. You know, I don't think that, you know, Stan ever really like claimed that stuff, but he never turned people off the idea that, you know, he was responsible. But Denny O'Neil, so like, as important as Stan Lee is to comic books, Stan Lee is not just important to Marvel. Stan Lee is important to comic books. As important as Stan Lee is to Marvel, in my mind, Denny O'Neil he's in that same arena. Uh, you know, Denny O'Neil started out as being Stan Lee's assistant, and you know, he did stuff with Stan Lee, and he worked with Stan Lee, and he learned how to be an editor and all this stuff, and uh, you know, he went on to do other stuff. His name is nowhere near as popular as Stan Lee. He's not in any comic book movie and a cameo, not to my knowledge. uh, but Denny O'Neil did so much stuff for the comic book world that he did out of being a fan, right? Like, he cared about the characters and he cared about the stories. He was a writer through and through. And uh, you know, he's he's a man of ideals. He was a very intelligent man. And I heard him in an interview say that, you know, I'm never going to be on the front lines of some big movement, you know, chanting and leading a crowd and all this stuff because I'm just this tiny little dude. He's like, but I have access to comic books and I will write stories. And that's what he contributed to the comic book world. This issue of Green Lantern back here that he did with Neil Adams. I mean, it's famous for the cover, which has Speedy uh, being addicted to heroin, doing heroin and stuff, and like that was the big thing. This superhero sidekick was addicted to heroin, and so he brought these social and political issues into the comic book world, and he didn't use them to, you know, preach and really push an idea or anything like that. He used them to raise awareness that these things are going on, and it's like he brought realism. He brought realistic elements into comic books. You know, instead of having just a bunch of pop, zow, zam stuff and Batman in space, he brought, you know, drug problems and real life stuff into comic books. You know, there's also a ton of supernatural stuff that he did. But he used his writing to send you a message, and that's what being a writer is. Being a writer, you entertain, but you also tell a story. You tell you know, your story has a moral, and Denny O'Neil was very good at getting his morals across in his stories. Uh, he also contributed, you know, it's not just Batman that he contributed to, but he contributed to a lot of things. He wrote for Marvel Comics, edited for Marvel Comics. He wrote for DC Comics, and He's the guy that created Raish and Talia al Ghul, and he created Richard Dragon, and he created Lady Shiva, and in Marvel, he created Madam Web and Hydro Man, and in Iron Man, he created Obadiah Stane and the Ironmonger. He introduced in Daredevil Yuriko Oama, which later became Lady Deathstrike. He is rumored to have named Optimus Prime, which is pretty awesome. He created Azrael, the guy that replaced Batman when Bane broke his back. And I listened to an interview today about that, about the Nightfall story, which is one of the greatest Batman stories ever, and it's a huge event. It's a year's worth of Batman comics across like 6 titles. It's massive. And I was actually thinking about this a while back because I've actually been wanting to reread that book, and I was just thinking about the state of comic books at that time. And they broke Batman's back and replaced him with Azrael in the bat suit, and they did it right after they killed Superman. Doomsday killed Superman, and they replaced Superman with the Superman Steel and Superboy and Cyborg Superman and the Eradicator. Like, that all happened at the same time, right back to back. And Denny O'Neil was not aware that they killed Superman, that they were killing Superman. He used to take his writers up to like some place and have a retreat, once a year and plan out the year's stories. And they were planning out Nightfall, Night's End. And, it's Denny O'Neil that really fleshed that idea out, because a comic writer came to him and said, "Hey, I've got this idea for a Batman story where Batman is forced into retirement." And it was just like a 2-issue story. And Denny O'Neil's like, that's interesting, that's cool, but like, if we're going to do this thing, let's really do this thing. So he bought the idea off the guy, and then got his writers together and just planned this year-long story out. And he said a Time Warner exec came down and was like, you can't get rid of Bruce Wayne. And he was like, "Dude, trust me, man. If I could just tell you everything, you'd be like, holy crap, that's amazing." But they had to rework the Bruce Wayne element in it, because Bruce Wayne wasn't around at all apparently originally. And but they did all this stuff, and like, he's responsible for this grand epic that we have, that is Nightfall and Night's End. And just that alone, if that's your only contribution to the mythos of Batman, then that's a great contribution. But that's not all. He influenced the dudes that were writing that, and it's just, he was awesome. He introduced Leslie Tompkins to the mythos of Batman. He created her. She didn't exist before him, and Leslie Tompkins is not as important as Alfred is to Batman, but she's important as well. She's a mother figure to him. Another thing that Denny O'Neil was responsible for was the killing of Jason Todd. So he thought that maybe readers would be more invested if they had a say in the creative process. And so they were like, let's let's create this hotline voting system where they could call in and vote on the outcome of a story. And they didn't know what to do with it. And he was like, it's got to be something big. Like, it can't just be just like Batman gets a new dog. It's like, it's got to be huge. And so they came up with the killing of Robin. Like everybody knows Robin. Robin's a household name thanks to the TV show. It's like, so if we kill Robin, it'll blow people's minds. And it's like, and they also thought that not a lot of people liked Jason Todd to begin with. So they put this ad in the comics that if you wanted Robin to live, you called one of these phone numbers, and if you wanted Robin to die, you called the other phone number. And they had a voting system set up to where whichever one got the most votes, that's what happened. And by like 72 votes, Jason Todd died. It's pretty nuts. But that was Denny O'Neil. That was his idea. And he's responsible for that. And that's, it's one of the biggest deals in comic books. Next to Bucky getting killed in Captain America, you've got Jason Todd dying. And, that's a bit deal. That's another realistic thing that he threw in the comics. Because, you got a 15, 16-year-old kid running around fighting crime. Not all of them's going to win, So, like I said, I didn't know the dude personally, but he had a huge impact on the world of Batman. And I mean, as a Batman fan, you have to give mad props to Denny O'Neil. Because without Denny O'Neil, we wouldn't have Batman. At least not how we have him today. And, he didn't create the Question, but when DC got the rights to the Question from Charlton Comics, they asked him if he wanted to write. So you can either write Captain Atom, or you can write the Question. And Denny O'Neil said that he didn't like messing with demigods, so he took the Question. And it's one of my favorite comic runs ever, is Denny O'Neil and Dennis Cohen's run on the Question. And it's just great stuff, man. And he's just responsible for a character that I love a lot. And I'm sad that he's gone. Sad that all these legendary comic book creators are dying off. So, but Denny O'Neil, man, Batman fans owe him so much, and Green Arrow fans owe him so much, and it's crazy to think that, something that this guy wrote 40 years ago is still impacting people today. And and that's cool. That's his legacy. His legacy is the stories that he wrote, wisdom that he imparted to people through his stories, and ideals that he passed on through those pages. And there's a lot of people that worked in the industry with him that have been saying really awesome stuff about him on social media today. Kelly Jones and Chuck Dixon and Graham Nolan. And Chuck Dixon posted this really cool thing where Uh, just talking about who Denny O'Neil was and the type of guy that Denny O'Neil was. And at Batman 500, they were going to put the new creative team on the book. And Jim Aparo's last issue was going to be 499. And he was going to go into semi-retirement. And Denny O'Neil thought that Jim Aparo, who had been on Batman for so long, deserved to be on that anniversary issue. And so he made stuff happen and got Jim Aparo in to issue 500. And so the last check that Jim Aparo received from DC Comics before he retired was the biggest check he'd ever gotten. And that was all thanks to Denny O'Neil. And so he didn't just care about the characters of the comics, he cared about the people that were making those comics. And, that's something that the world needs more of, is people that care about other people, especially when it's a boss caring about their employees. If everybody just care about everybody else, then the world would be a much better place. And so that's probably all I got. I don't know what else to say. I'm just kind of been rambling anyway. So if you've tuned in this long, thanks. I give you a thumbs up. But just want to, I know he's gone, and I know that he can't hear me or anything like that, but thank you, Denny O'Neil, for making Batman as freaking cool as he is and helping making him a household name. And thank you for your contributions to comic books, and thank you for your contribution to the world. And you will be greatly missed. So thank you for all of your work. So to honor Mr. O'Neil, I'm going to probably read some Denny O'Neil stuff. My brother got me this novel for Christmas a few years ago, maybe last year. I'm not sure when. I think it was last year. And it's essentially his question run, and it's how Denny O'Neil felt he should have written the question from the get-go. And my brother praises this book, says it's amazing. It's his favorite question thing. So to honor the memory of Denny O'Neil, I'm probably going to start reading this thing, which is really weird, man. Did you know there's no page, there's no pictures in this thing? How do people do this? So, if you have a favorite Denny O'Neil story, or just memory of Denny O'Neil, like if you ever met Denny O'Neil, that'd be really cool to hear about. Drop it in the comments. But until next time, be excellent to each other.